This is our third in a series of classes on the book of Daniel, surviving and thriving as a Jew in a foreign country. And the book of Daniel, as we have been saying, is a very understudied book. It's interesting why that's so. It could be because it's not taught in school, and that could be just because we're already teaching a lot of different things. But there could be other reasons why, including its difficulty, especially language. And some of that we're going to see today, although we'll kind of address that a little bit by doing something that we don't usually do, which is reading the Tanakh in English. But there's a reason for it, and we're going to see in a little bit. The first week, we really just focused on our context, understanding the times that Daniel lived in. And as we noted then, Daniel was someone that lived in a very chaotic time. As people who live in chaotic and times of chaos and upheaval, we can relate to that. And the chaos was on multiple different levels: religious, political, geographical, and other types of areas. So we talked about that in our first class. And last week, we talked about chapter 1 in the book of Daniel, which, if we could give one theme to it, we would say that the theme was that it's all about maintaining his identity in very difficult circumstances, and the steps that he took in order to go that far, which we talked about how it impacted his diet effectively. But it wasn't just about the food that he ate, although we said that was a big part of it, but also how he showed his independence from the king while still fitting in. It's easy to be independent when you're not there, but he was showing his independence while being there by not accepting the king's daily rations. Anyway, today we're gonna start chapter 2, which is quite lengthy. I'm not even sure if we'll cover all the things that we want to cover in chapter 2. It's really quite long. It's almost 50 pisukim, so it makes it hard to get through all of it, and certainly to analyze it after we do get through all of it. But what we're going to try and do today is get a sense of what happened here, remembering that Daniel has gone from being someone that was an outsider, and at this point, he's at least on the team. He's on the king's staff, if you will. He's one of many advisors that the king has, and we're going to see how that comes into play in the narrative, in the story that we're going to read today. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me just throw it on here. So in case you don't have a book of Daniel with you, you can look at the screen that I have, which has the Hebrew, which very quickly is going to turn into Aramaic, and the English. So while we're reading Hebrew, I'll read the Hebrew, but once it shifts to Aramaic, then I'm just going to turn it into pure English, because Aramaic is very, very challenging. Most of us are not trained in it. So it says as follows: "Ubishnat shtayim malchut Nebuchadnezzar chala Nebuchadnezzar halam Nebuchadnezzar halomot, v'titpa'em rucho v'ushnato niyat alav." In the second year in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. His spirit was agitated, yet he was overcome by sleep. So we have here a story of someone, what did I just do there? Who is, sleep is an issue. Okay, so what happens next? Why is my screen not scrolling? Sorry, 1 second. Okay, here we go. ויאמר המלך לקרוא לחרטומים ולאשפים ולמכשפים ולכסדים להגיד למלך חלומותיו ויבואו ויעמדו לפני המלך. So the king orders all sorts of advisors, what they translate here as magicians, exorcists, sorcerers, Chaldeans, to be summoned in order to tell the king what he had dreamed. They came and stood before the king. And we could talk about whether or not those titles are the right titles, but that's the English translation that we have. Vayomer lahem hamelech, pasuk 3, Chalom chalamti, I dreamed a dream, but tipa'em ruchi, and my insides are bouncing around inside of me, ladat et halom, to know what is this dream. Vayidabru hakasdim lamelech aramit, so the kasdim speak to the king in Aramaic, and now all of a sudden the story shifts in Aramaic, and now I'm going to read this in English. So what do they say? Hold on, let me just put it in pure English. Oops. Let's just make it English. Okay, whoops. Here we are. So we're in Pasuk 4. The Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Relate the dream to your servants, and we will tell its meaning." So basically, the king has come to them and said, I had a dream. I can't sleep as a result of it. It's eating me up inside. I have this anxiety, as they translate it here. So the advisors say, "Great, tell us the dream, and we'll try and make sense of it." So the king says in reply to the Chaldeans, "I hereby decree, if you will not make the dream and its meaning known to me, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your house is confiscated." So the king threatens the advisors, saying, "Tell me the dream and its meaning." So he says, "Okay." So they say, "But if you tell me the dream and its meaning, you shall receive from me gifts, presents, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its meaning." So he says, "Listen, you have two choices. You could tell me the dream and its meaning, and I will give you great reward, great honor. If you don't tell me the dream and the meaning, then I'm going to make sure you are killed violently, and your possessions will be taken away from you. Your family's not going to be too well off either." So Pasuk 7 says, "Once again they answered, 'Let the king relate the dream to his servants, and we will tell its meaning.'" So the servants say, "Hey, okay, but tell us the dream." The king said in reply, "It is clear to me that you are playing for time, since you see that I have decreed that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one verdict for you. You have conspired to tell me something false and fraudulent until circumstances change. So relate the dream to me, and I will then know that you can tell its meaning." So they keep asking for the dream, and the king says, "You're not asking. You're just playing for time. You see, I need you to tell me what the dream is, and you're going to tell me something that's lying, false." And then hope that it works out. He says, "No, tell me the dream, and then I know that the meaning is correct." Right? So in other words, the king is not telling them what the dream is. He's saying, "You have to tell me the dream that I had and the meaning of it." So the Chaldeans said in reply to the king, "There is no one on earth who can satisfy the king's demand. For a great king or ruler, none has ever asked such a thing of any magician, exorcist, or Chaldean." You're asking the impossible. The thing asked by the king is difficult. There is no one who can tell it to the king except the gods whose abode is not among the mortals. No human being could tell you what your dream is. We can't tell you what the dream was. We could potentially tell you what it means, but we can't do that unless you tell us what the dream actually was. Whereupon the king flew into a violent rage and gave an order to do away with all the wise men of Babylon. So he said, "I'm upset at all of you. I'm killing all of you." The decree condemning the wise men to death was issued. Daniel and his companions were about to be put to death. When Daniel remonstrated with Arioch, the captain of the royal guard, who had set out to put the wise men of Babylon to death. So there's a decree. They're all going to die, including Daniel. And Daniel talks to the captain who's going to kill all of these king's men at the king's request, whose name is Arioch. And he speaks to him. And he says, he spoke up and said to Arioch, the royal officer, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" He says, "Well, why is the king rushing on this?" Thereupon Arioch informed Daniel the matter. So Arioch tells Daniel what the story is. So Daniel went to ask the king for time that he might tell the meaning to the king. So then Daniel went to his house and informed his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, of the matter. The three other Jewish people in the king's court are Daniel's colleagues. So he goes to tell them what the story is, that they might implore the God of heaven for help regarding this mystery, so that Daniel and his colleagues would not be put to death together with the other wise men of Babylon. The mystery was revealed to Daniel. So he prays, basically, and he asked them to pray. The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, and then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel spoke up and said, "Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons, removes kings and installs kings. He gives the wise their wisdom and knowledge to those who know. He reveals deep and hidden things, knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells within him. I acknowledge and praise you, O God of my fathers, you who have given me wisdom and power, for now you have let me know what we have asked of you. You have let us know what concerns the king." So just going to stop here for a second and just do a quick review of what we saw here. Sorry, 1 second. Let's see. Okay, so just very quickly, what have we seen? We've seen a couple things. First of all, Daniel is part of the the king's court, but not a very distinguished part, because it's not like he's fully informed of what's happening or anything like that. It doesn't seem like he even had much of a chance. And the king is out to kill his entire court. And why is the king ready to kill his court? Because he had a dream. He wants it interpreted, and no one's able to do so. And part of the reason no one's able to interpret it is because no one even knows what it is. No one has any idea what the dream was. We don't know what, as readers of the book, we still don't know what was the dream, what got the king going here, right? And of course, you have to be thinking as you're hearing this story that this sounds a lot like another story that we know, and that is the story of Yosef, although it's also a lot like the story of Achashverosh and Purim as well. And we're going to make those comparisons. But let's go back, just after we've reviewed where we're at this point, let's go back and let's see, so what happens? You know, what's the next part of this story here with Daniel? So let me bring it back up. We're about halfway through. So give me a chance to get to the end of the story, or at least the end of this part of the story, and see what happens. So Daniel, as we said, along with his friends, prayed to Hashem, and Hashem tells him. So Pasuk 24, thereupon Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to do away with the wise men of Babylon. He came and said to him as follows, do not do away with the wise men of Babylon. Bring me to the king, and I will tell the king the meaning. So Daniel tells Arioch, hey, wait a second, I could save a lot of people's lives and save you a lot of headache. Let me go to the king, I'll tell him the dream. The king said in reply to Daniel, who was called Belshazzar, as we saw in the previous story, that Daniel's name was changed to fit in the courtyard to have an Assyrian name, a Babylonian name. Can you really make known to me the dream that I saw in its meaning? So he says, you can tell me. Daniel answered the king and said, the mystery about which the king has inquired, wise men, exorcists, magicians, and diviners cannot tell to the king. Regular people can't tell you, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what is to be at the end of days. This is your dream and the vision that entered your mind in bed. O king, the thoughts that came to your mind in your bed are about future events. He who reveals mysteries has let you know what is to happen. Not because my wisdom is greater than that of other creatures has this mystery been revealed to me, but in order that the meaning should be made known to the king and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. O king, as you looked on, so basically up until now, right, Daniel still didn't explain to him the dream, but he explained to him why the king had the dream and what the dream is all about without telling him what it actually means. The dream that the king had that's keeping him awake at night is a dream that's telling him the future. And Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar, Hashem gave him the dream because Hashem wants him to see the future. So now we're going to see what that means. What was the dream and what did it portend? O king, as you looked on, there appeared a great statue. This statue, which was huge and its brightness surpassing, stood before you, and its appearance was awesome. So there's this big statue. The head of that statue was of fine gold. Its breast and arms, basically its midsection, were of silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze. Then the lower part of the body, bronze. So gold, silver, bronze. Its legs were of iron, and its feet part iron and part clay. Okay, so there's this statue which is big and imposing, and it's made of different materials. Gold on the top, then silver, then bronze, then iron mixed with clay. As you looked on, a stone was hewn out, not by hands, and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. So some kind of stone, not supernatural, comes and strikes the statue at the legs, and it crushes the legs. All at once, the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were crushed and became like chaff on the threshing floor of a summer, meaningless. Something blows away. A wind carried them off until no trace of them was left. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So that stone that did the damage basically grew and became a mountain, and that's all you could see. So that's the dream. Such was the dream, and we will now tell the king its meaning. You, O king, king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given kingdom, power, might, and glory, into whose hands he has given men, wild beasts, and the fowl of heaven, wherever they may dwell, and to whom he has given dominion over them all, you are the head of gold. But another kingdom will arise after you, inferior to yours, then yet a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the whole earth. But the fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron. Just as iron crushes and shatters everything, like iron that smashes, so will it crush and smash all these. You saw the feet and the toes, part potter's clay and part iron. That means it will be a divided kingdom. It will have only some of the stability of iron, and as much as you saw iron mixed with common clay. And the toes were in part iron, part clay, and that means the kingdom will be in part strong, part brittle. You saw iron mixed with common clay. That means they shall intermingle with the offspring of men, but shall not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will establish a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, a kingdom that shall not be transferred to another people. It will crush and wipe out all these kingdoms, but shall itself last forever. Just as you saw how a stone was hewn from the mountains, not by hands, and crushed to iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold, the great God has made known to the king what will happen in the future. The dream is sure and its interpretation reliable. So that's the dream. Then King Nebuchadnezzar prostrated himself and paid homage to Daniel and ordered that a meal offering and pleasing offerings be made to him. The king said in reply to Daniel, truly your God must be the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries to enable you to reveal this mystery. The king then elevated Daniel and gave him very many gifts and made him governor of the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect of all the wise men of Babylon. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those are his friends, Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, to administer the province of Babylon while Daniel himself was at the king's court. And that's the end of the situation. That's the end of this paragraph. So, wow, it's a very interesting piece, right? That you have this story that where Daniel has to find out what the dream is. He does, he interprets it, he understands what it means because Hashem tells him, and he relays it to the king, and the king is incredibly grateful, and he gives Daniel incredible prominence. He puts him as the chief officer. So that's all the story that we've read. So now what I'd like to do is start asking some questions about this story and say, hey, what's happening here? What are we supposed to make of this story? Is this just a story of success, random success of this nice Jewish boy, or is there something more to it? So in order to do that, what I'd like to do is compare it to the story of Yosef, of which there are many obvious comparisons. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask people to unmute themselves as they see fit, as they can answer. In what way can we compare and or contrast this with the story of Yosef? Ideally, let's start with the comparisons. In what way is this similar to Yosef? Anybody feel free to speak up. In what way is this similar to Yosef?
Yosef interpreted dreams in jail.
Right. So very similar, right? You have Yosef interprets dreams, Daniel interprets dreams. But even the point that you said of Yosef in jail, right? Like Yosef is interpreting dreams, not just like that, right? But actually in a bad situation, right? Yosef is in jail, going nowhere, basically dead, right? And here Daniel is also basically dead, right? Because the king has said, hey, I'm going to kill all of you. So there's a tremendous point of commonality between the two stories, where this poor kid, whether it be Yosef or Daniel, has to interpret a difficult dream for the king. But there's many more comparisons. What else do we have? What else is similar? Feel free to unmute yourself and pitch in. What else is similar in this situation? Well, if you don't recall, but I'll say one of the things that's what I'll call the Humpty Dumpty part, right? Which is one of the great lines in the Humpty Dumpty poem that we all know is, all the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't do it, right? And that's true in the Yosef story and the Daniel story, right? In the Yosef story, Yosef is not his go-to option for interpreting dreams. Yosef's no one. He's in a jail somewhere, right? Paro, before Yosef answers the dream, right? Yosef at Paro has asked many other people, including people with the types of names that we see here, Chartumim, which seems to be someone you go to in this type of situation. So it's not only that there's a dream interpretation by a young Jewish man who's in trouble, but actually it also happens after the others couldn't interpret, right? Meaning it's a last resort. There's nowhere else to turn. That's a big part of what happens here also, common to both stories. Good. So Tam says he was put into power afterwards, right? So that's true about both stories as well. Yosef, as a result of interpreting the dream, gets to be second in command. And it seems like Daniel also gets to be pretty much second in command here, because he's put in charge of the province of Babylon. That's not just any province, that's the main province. So actually, in that sense, it seems very, very similar. The reward in the end for interpreting the dream is similarly great and similar, right? You rise in the government. It's not just you get a trust fund, but actually you're going to have a say in how things work. And we're going to see how that plays out later in the story of Daniel. So that's a big comparison. But there's more. One of the things you didn't mention is
They both attribute their powers to Hashem.
Yes, great, right? That's a big part, right? Both of them say, hey, it's not me, this is Hashem, right? They both say that, right? Which is interesting because they don't have to say that, right? But they do. That's a big part of both stories, is the attribution that it comes from Hashem. So that's similar. I think another thing that's very similar is that the king is very troubled and can't sleep, right? Meaning in both stories, it's very clear that the king can't sleep. In fact, the expression "vatipa'em rucho" or "vatitpa'em rucho" is the same, which is he has some kind of anxiety, he's restless. That's true in both stories, which is very unusual. It's only in these stories that we really have this, except for another story where we know the king can't sleep, right? Where's the other story where we know the king can't sleep? Right? Who remembers? Where does that come from?
Achashverosh.
Achashverosh, right? That's a huge one, right? And then that turns right there. So these stories it's crazy how much commonality they have. By the way, so to compare to the story of Purim, right? There's lots of comparisons there also, right? Because there, the king, before we get to the where he can't sleep, right? Remember, after what he does in the first chapter where he kills Vashti, right now he's all depressed. He turns to all his king's men and say, what could you do for me? And at the end, it's this lonely Jew that ultimately is the answer, right? It's Esther, right? And it's a different kind of answer. It's not a dream, but that's the answer but she kind of plays the Daniel role. So it's interesting that's the case. And of course, she gets elevated to right-hand man. And at the end, Mordechai gets elevated to right-hand man. So there's a lot of comparisons between that story as well. Good. Anything else that's comparable to Yosef in terms of what we see here? How about the content of the dream? Is the dream in any way comparable? Remember, what was Yosef's dream? What was the dream that Paro has? Anyone remember?
Yeah, seven.
No.
Yeah, Flora, go. What were you going to say?
7 fat cows and 7 thin cows.
Fat cows and all
7 stores of wheat.
Yes, good. You must be going to a good shul, Flora. You're paying attention. You know what's going on. So no, absolutely right. Now, is there any comparison between those dreams and this dream? It's not exactly the same, but how is it comparable?
You tell me.
So,
I didn't hear the beginning of the class. Sorry.
No problem. One way that it's comparable is that the dream is not just any dream. It's telling the future that's going to impact the king, right? In Paro, right, what was the dream? The dream was that 7 good years, 7 bad years, so you better do something, right? And what's this dream about Nebuchadnezzar? The dream is Hashem says in the future, something's going to happen. Someone's going to come after you. Something, so knowing that it's about the future is significant. By the way, in both dreams, the interpreter says, Hashem is telling you what he's going to do, and he's telling you it's happening now. It's not waiting so long. It's coming soon, right? Which is also a key part of the dream. So that's something that's significant. And in both dreams, there's some good, but then there's bad, right? In other words, in the cows and the stalks dream, right? There's going to be good. There's going to be a lot of plenty. right? The market's going to go flying, but then it's going to come crashing down, right? And in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, right, you're this gold thing at the top of the heap. You're the head of the statue. But what's going to happen to that statue? It's coming crumbling down. So there's a message that there's going to be bad for the king, right? So it's interesting. There's just like so many comparisons that make you say, wow, that is like the Yosef story all over the place. That, of course, we have to ask ourselves, wait a second, how is it different, right? In what way is it not the same, right? And that is a big deal, right? So in what way are the dreams different, right? How is this story significantly different, right? So one is that Daniel is already in the court, right? Remember, he was in the court from last week. We had learned that he was in the court, whereas Yosef was in the jail. So there's some difference there. Another difference is the content of the dream in Paro and Yosef calls for action, right? There's something for you to do, right? Whereas in this dream, there's not so much to do, right? After Yosef tells Nebuchadnezzar, this is the dream, he says, and Hashem's telling you what's going to happen, but there's nothing to do about it, as opposed to Yosef, where if you know ahead of time what's going to happen, you could do something, right? In other words, like if I tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, right, you could like go out and bet on it, right? Like if I tell you the stock market's going to go up or down, right, depending on what you know, you could do something with that, and you could enrich yourself, you could put yourself in a better position. And that's really what Paro does, right? Yeah, Paro is effectively the recipient of what they call insider trading, right? Insider information. He knows something that other people don't know, right? That's Paro, right? He knows what other people don't know. Nebuchadnezzar, what's he going to do, right? What is Hashem telling him? He's telling him, listen, you're the king. Then there's going to be another one and another one and another one, and then I'm taking over. Very nice. What do you want me to do with that, right? There's nothing Nebuchadnezzar could do anything about it, which is interesting because you would think that once Nebuchadnezzar hears that, he should be upset, right? Because basically Daniel is telling him, you're not going to be king for much longer, right? You're not going to be the king for very long. And by the way, the next one is going to be inferior to you, and he's not going to last, and he's not going to last. So you would think if you're Nebuchadnezzar, you're a powerful king, you would say, hey, I don't like that message. Get out of here, kill you, off with your head, which we see he's the type of guy to do because he was ready to kill everybody for not knowing the dreams. And that brings me to another huge difference.
Couldn't he make the Teshuvah?
Who, Nebuchadnezzar? Yes, he could. But Hashem didn't tell him make teshuvah, right? Hashem didn't say, I'm telling you this so you make teshuvah, and then if you make teshuvah, I'll let you be king longer. He doesn't say that. So it's true, Flora, and that's a great point. He could do something with it, but it's not obvious that it's going to get him anywhere, right? It's not like, oh, now that I know this, because I know that's going to happen, it's going to change anything. Nothing's going to change. Hashem is still going to be the king at the end, right? That's going to be. So Nebuchadnezzar doesn't really have he could do teshuvah for himself, but it's not going to change the story. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
But in the story of Yonah, when he goes, they make teshuvah the whole people.
Great. And so actually, right, you're talking about Nineveh, right, where
Yes.
the king of Ashur hears, it's true. There, Hashem says, I'm destroying everything. He doesn't say in Yonah, he doesn't say, unless you do teshuvah. He never says that, right? And yet the king himself says, hey, wait a second. This is terrible. Let's do teshuvah. What's the worst that could happen? If we do teshuvah, maybe Hashem will change his mind and we'll be okay. So you're right that actually sometimes the king is so good, even though he was so bad, but he acts so correctly that he knows to do teshuvah without being asked to do teshuvah. So it's true, that could be what happens here, and we're going to see if that happens with Nebuchadnezzar. We don't know if that's going to happen or not, but maybe a little bit if we sought some teshuvah, because what does Nebuchadnezzar do? He accepts the dream, right? He says, that's the right thing, right? So we're going to talk about that. One of the huge differences between the two stories, tremendous, and we have to talk about this, is in Paro's dream, Paro is very happy to tell everybody what the dream is. In fact, he tells it twice, right? So like we see it very clearly what the dream is. In this story, in Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, something very interesting. We don't know the dream until Daniel tells him what the dream is and then tells him what the interpretation is. In fact, part of the challenge that Daniel has is to interpret the dream, right? Part of the challenge, not to interpret the dream, to know what the dream is without being told what the dream is. That's the real test for him, right? Is to know what the dream was. Now, and there's questions as to whether or not Nebuchadnezzar remembered the dream altogether. Different people read the story differently, different commentaries. Some people say Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. It was so startling to him that he forgot it. But he knew that he had a dream, and he needed someone to tell him what the dream was so that he could remember it, and then he would know that that person had the interpretation also. That's one way to explain the story. The other way to explain the story is that Nebuchadnezzar, he knew what the dream was, but he didn't trust what people were going to say to him. So the only way that he could know that the interpreter was correct was if the interpreter knew what the dream was without even being told, right? And so that's different than the story in Paro, right? Paro, how does Paro know that Yosef has the right dream is a great question. And it's actually a discussion amongst the Chachamim. How did Paro know that Yosef was right? He said 7 good years, 7 bad years. But who says that's definitely right? Right. In fact, there's a very famous midrash that Rashi quotes that different people had other suggestions. You were going to have 7 children, and then they were going to die, or you were going to build 7 cities, and they were going to fall. So who says that Yosef was right? It's actually a big question. And actually, the way that I like to interpret, and this is not the subject for today, I like to interpret the story of Yosef. If you read it carefully, Paro doesn't tell Yosef all the details that he saw in the dream, right? In other words, if you read the Pisukim, first the Torah tells us the dream that Paro had. Then it tells us the details that Paro tells Yosef and the other advisors what he saw. And if you look, it doesn't match up exactly. It seems like Paro changes some things, and Yosef, when he interprets the dreams, catches the mistakes that Paro made on purpose in order to catch people. And that's how Paro knew Yosef was right. Right? That's actually an interesting and I think important way to interpret the Yosef story, but that's not our topic. But the point is that Daniel has to overcome this huge challenge, right? The challenge is he has to interpret a dream that he doesn't know. He doesn't get the details. So first he has to get the details, which is why he has to go to Hashem, right? And that's the next huge difference between Yosef and Daniel. In Yosef, he attributes everything to Hashem. He says, listen, it's not me, it's Hashem who interprets dreams. But it's interesting. You never see Yosef talk to Hashem. He never says, Hashem, so what's the story here? You never see Hashem tell Yosef, this is the deal. Yosef there's no miracles by Yosef. It's all just his getting it. How does he know that that's what Hashem wants? We don't know. As opposed to Daniel, who's very overtly reaching out to Hashem, right? He prays to Hashem and he says, Hashem, please tell me what the dream is going to be. And we see that as a result, that is something that happens. So a huge difference between Yosef and Daniel is Yosef doesn't seem to talk to Hashem, whereas Daniel is very overt, very outward, very expressly talking to Hashem. So that's a huge, huge difference which we have to talk about. There's one other major difference between the two stories, and that is in the other stories, Yosef is alone, right? When Yosef stands before Paro, he stands there as Yosef, and he remains there as just Yosef, nobody else. As opposed to the Daniel story, if you recall, when Daniel wants to get the answer to the dream, he doesn't just say, let me ask Hashem. He turns to his other Judean friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those other young Jewish men that are in the court of the king, and he says, help me. You guys got to pray to Hashem also. And at the end, he is thankful to them, and he elevates them as well. So what's different between Yosef and Daniel is Daniel, even though he's a star, it's a team effort. Daniel involves other people. He's much more, as we would say in today's modern parlance, collaborative I think that's something that's very, very interesting as well. So we've got a lot here. We've got this story that is very similar to the Yosef story, but at the same time, incredibly different. So the differences are meant to be highlighted. And what we see here about Daniel is a number of things that honestly, he's better than Yosef in the sense of what he does, right? And how do I mean he's better than Yosef? He's better than Yosef. What he accomplishes is harder to accomplish because Yosef just gave an interpretation of a dream. Daniel had to figure out what the dream was. He's more religious than Yosef. Yosef is thankful to Hashem, but Daniel is praying to Hashem, and his prayer shows much, much greater depth of recognition of Hashem and Hashem's involvement in it. And last, Yosef is not as alone, self-centered, if you will, as Daniel is. Daniel involves others, and when he succeeds, gives reward to others as well. And I think there's some major, major points that we have to understand as a result of that Daniel actually comes out looking better than Yosef, even though we love Yosef, and Yosef is an entrancing, enthralling story that every one of us remembers and our children love, and it became a Broadway musical and a Disney movie. It's such a great story. Actually, Daniel really, in many ways, is better. Right? Daniel is actually just a better version of Yosef. I'll add in one other way. Yosef, at the end, uses the dream to enrich Paro and himself, whereas Daniel gets nothing. I mean, he gets a better position out of it, but that's not why. He's not trying to do that, whereas Yosef is trying to get out of jail that way. But also the end result of Paro's dream is that Egypt gets rich. The end result, and Bnei Israel gets saved, but then they get sent down to Egypt. Whereas the end result of Daniel is Hashem is recognized all over the world. It's a more lofty, glorified goal. So we have a lot to talk about. We're not done here, but we're gonna stop here for today. And saying that we have to come up with an explanation of this interpretation of this dream. What's the story with why Hashem is giving Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar this message? What's the deal? Why is that happening? But today, suffice it to say that we saw something pretty amazing. And that is, we took the story of Yosef, which we know is an amazing, amazing story, and one of the really proud moments of Jewish history, and we actually one-up it, and we do it even better than originally in the Yosef story. And I think that's amazing and fantastic. And it means that we got to come back and we got to read it again and say, hey, so what's this really all about? This great story that few of us really know. Why aren't we telling this one to our kids? We should be. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So next week, 12 o'clock to around this time, we'll focus on understanding the meaning of the dream, and also what did Hashem have in mind by telling Daniel this, what's going to happen in the future? What's the point of this? So that's what we're going to talk about next week. Any questions?
Thank you.